Eerie Hall is directed by Neil Rawls and covers the duration of September 1984 to December 1985. This story features Chris Di Cesare, his father Vito Di Cesare, his friends in college Craig Norris, Linda Kalasinski, and Jeff Ungar. We are also introduced to one of his dorm roommates, Paul. We do not know his surname. Maybe he wanted to keep it private. These so far are the main players that we get to introduce throughout the narrative. In the way that Chris is depicted in the storytelling, we are told over and over again how much of a sincere bloke Chris really is. We are told that he got into this college on a scholarship. So he is very disciplined, he's hardworking, he's honest, he's duty bound, he feels loyalty towards his friends, he feels the need to gain the approval of his father. So overall, we are told that Chris is a very sincere, decent guy. That is echoed throughout the story at different points. The story opens on 3rd September 1984 when he starts his first day of college. When he first moves into college, he has a roommate in the dorm. His name is Paul. Apart from his roommate Paul, he becomes very good friends with Jeff Ungar and later on Craig Norris. Other people that appear throughout the story are Beth, we do not know her surname, and Linda Kalasinski. Linda does appear in the series, giving voice to her own experiences. We also see Jeff and Craig speaking for themselves. We meet Chris's father, and much later into the narrative, quite a while later actually, we are introduced to Chris himself. Until that time, we only hear other people building the story around him. So the story itself opens by telling us about Chris, but we hear from Chris much later into the story. We don't get to see the real Beth. We don't get to see the real Paul. So these are the people whom we get to see throughout the 3 episodes. Chris starts his college at Geneseo on 3rd September 1984. His father drops him off, and from there on, we see how Chris bonds with his friends, and that he's a very decent guy. They make it a point to tell us that while other friends are jokesters, they play around, they're pranksters, and they do have light-hearted moments. Chris himself seems to be very, very sincere, not someone that people would play around with. He's not pranked on. He's not someone that people would unnecessarily trouble. He just keeps to himself. He does his work and he goes about his day. As the story goes on, we realize that Chris starts to become more and more withdrawn and silent as time goes on. Now, the others around him assume that he is becoming withdrawn or silent because he's having adjustment issues. Since he comes from a small town, he never really moved around that much, and he never had to immerse himself in a completely new atmosphere. For example, his friend Craig Norris assumes that he is probably having adjustment issues since he's a small town boy and he's never been out away from his family. So now suddenly staying in college, perhaps he's not able to adapt to the changes that life has thrown his way. Likewise, Linda Kalasinski assumes that maybe he's dealing with mental health struggles, and because in the 80s there was stigma against mental health issues, perhaps he's keeping it to himself for fear of being shamed for having depression or some other issue. What was really ailing Chris, however, was he had started hearing voices. Objects were moving around. He could hear noises, and these were completely unexplained. No one else around him was noticing it. It was just him. He kept hearing his name being called. Chris, Chris, Chris. And this came out as whispers when he was working, when he was running, or when he was doing other things in his life. All of a sudden, he would hear noises, strange bangings, or he would hear whispers, which no one else did. One night, Chris is working on his typewriter and he's alone in his room. As he's studying, he suddenly hears his name repeatedly being called out. He becomes uncomfortable and he looks around, but there is nothing. He continues working and he suddenly sees a dark, shadowy figure pop up out of nowhere into his room. He gets really, really freaked out. He runs out of the room screaming and heads straight to Jeff's room, which is right next to his own room. Jeff always carries a camera around. He's a shutterbug. So when he sees Chris running into his room all panicky and terrified and screaming, Jeff notes that he had never heard such a screaming before. It was blood-curdling scream that Chris ran out of his room with. So Jeff comforts him and he asks him what is the issue, and Chris says that there's someone in my room, they're standing there in my room. So Jeff then goes into Chris's room. He takes his camera. He's really terrified. So when he goes in, he goes with the camera poised to take photographs. And as he enters, he starts clicking. He takes, I think, 3 photographs of different angles of the room. But when he later on processes the photos, he doesn't see anything in the photos. And even in real life, when he notices the room around, there's nothing there. It's just an empty room. He comes back to Chris and he says that there is nothing in his room. Jeff is quite understanding. He's there for his friend. However, Chris feels embarrassed about this whole incident. So he doesn't want Jeff to share this with others. He requests him to keep this whole incident private. Jeff promises that he will not share this with anyone else. As these incidents are escalating with Chris, at some point, Ed and Lorraine Warren visit Geneseo and they give a lecture on the supernatural. At this lecture, Jeff goes along with Chris. Jeff is a keen enthusiast. He is a researcher, a learner. They show his real notes, where he has taken down notes from the lecture of the important points that they were making. One of the points that they make is that ghosts draw their energy from the living. Customarily, a door has to be opened. Those doors are opened either through the law of invitation or attraction. There is a type of person, because of their compassion or sympathetic nature, ghosts are attracted to. It's about people, their energy, their spirit. What you put out into the world, you get back from the world. At the end of the lecture, Lorraine and Ed are signing books. So Chris also joins the line of people who are interested to get their autographs or signatures. And there Lorraine reacts a bit strangely. She looks at him and she refuses to shake hands with him. She says, no, I can't do this. And she tells her husband Ed that she doesn't want to be there anymore. This experience is extremely humiliating for Chris. He doesn't understand why he was rejected this way in front of everybody. This incident adds on to his feeling that something is wrong with him. We see a scene of him sitting around with Jeff and Craig, and he's wondering to his friends, what is wrong with me? Why are these things happening to me? Craig tells Chris that he has this energy of being open and honest, like a door that anyone could walk through. At this point, Chris begins to assume that maybe he's losing his mind. He starts questioning his own sanity. One night, Paul, his roommate, wakes up and he says that there is something down there because they have bunk beds. Because in their room, they have made an alteration where the lower part is where they have kept their study table and other things, where there's space for them to sit around, and they built a bunk bed on top where the both of them can sleep. So he tells him there is something down there, just go and check it out. Chris tells him to just go back to sleep. Paul insists that he go out and check it out. That night, the entity that has been haunting Chris makes itself visible to Paul. Finally, Chris feels validated that he's not actually just losing his mind. This is something real, something external, not something that's going on within himself, because his friend has also witnessed the same thing that he has been seeing.